So my presentation is about country teasers, hipsters, and depressive musical expression. So in 1987, Julia Kristeva completed her study on depression and melancholia, titled Soleil Noir, or Black Sun. At the outset of its second chapter, The Life and Death of Speech, she writes, quote, "Let us keep in mind the speech of the depressed, repetitive and monotonous. They utter sentences that are interrupted, exhausted, come to a standstill. Even phrases they cannot formulate. A repetitive rhythm, a monotonous melody emerge and dominate the broken logical sequences, changing them into recurring obsessive litanies." Unquote. Later on in the same chapter, she observes that with the speech of melancholy persons, meaning appears to be arbitrary. In 2006, the Country Teasers released their final studio album, The Empire Strikes Back, the anti-penultimate track of which I will now play for you. Please follow along under the first bold heading on your handout. Benedict Roger Wallers was the lead singer and songwriter for the Country Teasers, a band formed in Scotland in 1993. They played a version of country music blended with a number of diverse aesthetics, including punk, gothic, no-wave, art rock, metal, and techno. Their songs adopted a wide range of moods, from satirical and nonchalant to enraged and satanic to depressed and lonely. Wallers specialized in writing lyrics from the point of view of apparently evil people. He inhabited subject positions devoid of morality but full of anger, misanthropy, and humor. Reviews of Country Teasers albums often try to redeem Wallers by theorizing that he merely ironically performed these reprehensible identities. Though irony is prevalent throughout his work, to use it to exonerate Wallers is to ignore what is expressed by ironic detachment. Wallers' lyrics are much more than mockeries of the perspectives they adopt, just as the music of the Country Teasers at times pokes fun at its genres, at times makes sincere and effective attempts to explore them. Using Kristeva as our guide, we can observe the ways in which the music and words of Panic Holiday express depression. Waller's sentences are convoluted and ambiguous. For example, "Get from panic you cannot so easily away." The understated timbre and volume of the electric guitar can be characterized as withdrawn and subdued, and its slow repetitions affect a kind of inescapable monotony. Most importantly, Waller's emphasizes his separation from the meanings of his own words when he assures his listeners that the song's offensive lyrics only mean what they say, when he treats such highly emotionally charged words simply as materials to be juxtaposed. To separate yourself from the meaning of your own expression is an example of irony. But Waller's cannot be completely ironic, or else he would not find the juxtaposition of words with nice and nasty meanings to be tasty. For Kristeva, the meanings expressed by depressive speech are arbitrary because the speaker does not believe that language can meaningfully connect with affect. I will relate this faithlessness in expression to the internet music criticism produced by a hipster community that views mainstream commercial music as incapable of authentically meaningful expression. I will argue that the quasi-irony of the Country Teasers resists a hipster-esque resistance to meaninglessness by refusing to complete an ironic negation of depressive meaninglessness and by rendering irrelevant a depression-inducing superego. In order to reach this conclusion, I will rely on theoretical works of Julia Kristeva, Sigmund Freud, and Simon Critchley. In 2003, Alexander Linhart reviewed for Pitchfork.com the Country Teasers' 2003 album, Secret Weapon Revealed at Last. The first track of the album is titled Success, and is one of the many moments in the Country Teasers repertoire in which Waller's acknowledges his own susceptibility to melancholia. Please follow along under the second bold heading on your handouts. In his review, Linhart condemns the Country Teasers for the offensiveness of both their lyrics and their music. He finds their willfully sloppy mixture of different aesthetics to be unsuccessful, and he finds Waller's lyrics to be juvenile and senselessly provocative. In particular, Linhart focuses on what I will call the Kornikova line. He writes, "After interrogating that line for some time, it's unclear whether it's supposed to be entertaining. If so, is it intended to be entertaining on its own, or making fun of people/fans that think that line is entertaining?" Unquote. Linhart is concerned with the ironic status of the Kornikova line. Is Waller's just kidding, or is he ironically kidding? Indeed, it is difficult to tell how seriously Waller's takes his own words. On the other hand, it is clear that the passage of time is a source of frustration and disappointment for him. In the song's initial verse, Waller's first explicitly refers to his depression and then seems to psychoanalyze himself and give himself advice. Specifically, he invites himself to experience the joys of narcissism and to augment this joy by looking outward, presumably in order to gain an appreciation for masculine beauty. With this in mind, it becomes apparent that the two verses set up a dichotomy between the sex appeal of men and the sex appeal of women in the context of age and disappointment. The complexity and sensitivity of what Waller's expresses in the first verse intersects illuminatingly with the explosions of resentment embodied by the Kornikova line and a phrase like "fucking me off." This conflict between aggression and sensitivity resembles Sigmund Freud's theory of melancholia. In his book, Mourning and Melancholia, Freud theorizes that when my love object is lost, I internalize it as the simultaneously loved and hated other. I love this internalization, this other within myself, but I also hate it, because it represents that which has wounded me by leaving me, that which has thwarted my ethical duty to fulfill my desire, that which has undermined me by eluding me. Consequently, in my melancholia and my depression, I depress myself. I am depressed by the self that my loss made me become. The hybrid between myself and my loss is what motivates the depression-inducing superego, i.e. my conscience, to judge me as worthless, ineffectual, impotent. The harsh noise and nauseating speed of success can be heard as an expression of hatred-induced aggression, and the Kornikova line can be understood as a hatred-induced insult. On the other hand, the tuneful interlude between the two verses and Waller's invitation to narcissism ostensibly preserve the possibility of love. In this way, the musical expression of the Country Teasers becomes meaningful. But what happens if we follow Linhart's lead and interpret the song in terms of ironic expression? Let us assume that the Kornikova line is ironic. The degree to which my expression is ironic is proportional to the degree to which I am absent from it. Waller's and the Country Teasers may choose to ironize their expression in order to resist beratements from a superego that decrees that insulting Anna Kournikova is wrong and mixing Gothic, country music, and noise rock is unsuccessful. But absence from expression is problematized by Waller's when he admits with a highly convincing degree of emotional honesty that the passage of time is making him depressed. He juxtaposes irony with what is resultantly revealed as unavailable to irony, which is the ability to confront or come to terms with depression. Linhart wrote his review of the Country Teasers for Pitchfork.com. This site is closely linked with a cultural identity known as hipster, and with a musical style known as indie. Members of the hipster community tend to have in common a love of indie music, a distrust of commercialism, and a penchant for ironic speech. The hipster identity began to crystallize in the 1990s and owes many of the particulars of its formation to the ways in which it inaugurated and revolutionized internet music criticism. Pitchfork was formed in 1995 by Ryan Schrager, and you can see some screenshots of the Pitchfork website in the handout. During its heyday in the mid-2000s, Pitchfork's ratings of indie music albums on a scale from 1.0 to 10.0, coupled with the highly opinionated and colorful writing styles of its reviewers, turned it into an astoundingly influential tastemaker. But it also became infamous for the snarky, haughty, knowing, and ironic tone of its reviews. In an interview with the Washington Post in 2006, Schraber defended his site's staff. Quote, "Honesty is such an important journalistic attribute, and you have to be completely honest in a review. If it gets tempered at all for the sake of not offending somebody, then what we do sort of loses its value," unquote. For Schraber, honesty is often offensive, and to pander to easily offended tastes by toning criticism down is to simultaneously devalue criticism. Put another way, criticism loses its meaning when it is inauthentic, when it appeals to the masses, when it agrees with the qualities of music that are prized by mainstream commercialism. In 2009, The Village Voice conducted an interview with the mysterious creator of hipsterrunoff.com, who is known simply as Carl. Hipster Runoff is a popular indie music blog in which Carl frequently assesses the cultural impact of music-related internet-based events such as Pitchfork's album reviews and leaks of the newest Animal Collective release. And you can see screenshots from Hipster Runoff after the Pitchfork screenshots, and I also made screenshots of like specific points in the blog posts, some of the blog posts that writes. In his interview with The Voice, Carl responds to a question about his personal life by assuring his interviewer that outside of Hipster Runoff, quote, "I now have a job that I hate and doesn't really allow me to express myself," unquote, placing those two phrases in scare quotes. When asked what his scare quotes signified, Carl confesses, quote, I think sometimes I just feel disconnected from my own words/world. When I type things out, they seem cliched and or insignificant, unquote. Later on in the interview, Carl seems to reiterate this anxiety over words, but in terms of how music critics position themselves with respect to commercialism. Quote, "The perception of music criticism seems to have shifted to a product review by someone who cares too much. It's pretty interesting to think about everything as a product listed on Amazon.com and what information you need to evaluate that product to become an educated consumer," unquote. Commercialism for Carl seems to devalue the idea of education. It turns musical expression into something we shouldn't care about. Commercialism, therefore, would somehow contribute to the arbitrary status of that expression. It would contribute to the break between expression and meaningful affect. This is the kind of break Wallace produces when he claims that his offensive lyrics only mean what they say. But in order to properly illustrate the ways in which the Country Teasers also resist an ironic break between expression and affect, I must turn to a final musical example. In 1996, the Country Teasers released their first full-length album, Satan Is Real Again, the penultimate track of which I will now play for you. Please follow along under the third bold heading on your handouts. Satan is real again, Wallers half sings, half speaks about making friends with bad thoughts. The depressively monotonous melody slowly slinks upward, only to aggressively and emphatically descend again. And then the process repeats. The darkness of this musical atmosphere is intensified by the uncertain ironic status of Waller's bromance with Satan. What does the reality of Satan mean? Who are the young people of today? And in what way are the devil's jokes funny? Wallers describes his thoughts as simultaneously black and special. He then admits that his friends distrust them. To depressively acknowledge that your expression alienates people resembles the beratements of Freud's depression-inducing superego. But in order to explain Waller's view that his black thoughts are also special, I must turn to Freud's 1927 essay on humor. In this essay, Freud distinguishes between a stern, punishing formulation of the superego on the one hand, and on the other hand, a less hostile and even consoling formulation of the superego that is glimpsed in humor. Simon Critchley names Freud's stern and punishing superego, superego 1, and the humorous and friendly superego, superego 2. Critchley specifically emphasizes the friendly nature of superego 2, going so far as to advise thinking about it as your am-ego, your amigo. Superego 1, by contrast, tells the ego it is evil, worthless, and/or abject. He characterizes humor, the domain of superego 2, as the prime expression of inauthenticity because it relieves the ego from its responsibility to become itself by realizing its desire. It relieves the ego from the need to feel bad about being undermined by loss, and being implicated, therefore, in a degree of emptiness. For Wallers, the reality of Satan represents an attempt to confound superego 1, the voice of which is ultimately what necessitates a negation of emptiness. If superego 1 is your conscience, the source of ethical and moral imperatives, then fraternizing with the devil, the essence of moral aporia, could be interpreted as a desire to render depression-inducing ethical imperatives irrelevant. To befriend the devil is to free yourself from the need to be yourself, and from the need to feel worthless just because your superego tells you to. For Critchley, humor is the experience of a lack of self-coincidence. It is in this way that Waller's Satanism is an ironic joke. Wallers expresses his belief in the curative powers of confronting the superego when he sings, "Find humor through amorals and you will happy be." Wallers cites the reason for Satan's return as the need to punish non-free thinkers. To punish such individuals resembles Ryan Schraber's support for the offensiveness of Pitchfork's music criticism. Someone who is offended by what is conventionally offensive is a non-free thinker because he or she, in becoming offended, predictably reproduces arbitrarily conventional ethical values. A desire to punish what is arbitrary and meaningless seems to express an anxiety about meaninglessness, which results in a resistance to meaninglessness. If Waller's lyrics are ironic, they represent a resistance to this resistance. In order to reach my conclusion, I must return to Julia Kristeva's theories of depression. As opposed to Freudian depression, Kristeva defines what she calls narcissistic depression as the denial of the negation of loss affected by language. For Kristeva, this constitutes an archaic refusal to give up the original love object before learning to talk. To give up the original love object, which conventionally is the mother, constitutes a negation. Kristeva proposes that the subject who negates this loss of a loved one thinks, quote, "I have lost an essential object that happens to be, in the final analysis, my mother. But no, I have found her again in signs. Or rather, since I consent to lose her, I have not lost her." That is the negation. "I can recover her in language," unquote. I, the depressed subject, deny that language can achieve such a recovery, and am consequently forced to express myself in a medium I believe to be fundamentally ineffectual and meaningless. For Kristeva, to negate the loss of the original love object is to say, since I consent to lose her, I have not lost her. For the hipster, to To express ironically is to ostensibly evade depression by performing a similar negation. Since I consent to lose the meaning of words, I have not lost the meaning of words. Or, put another way, since I am self-conscious about the meaninglessness of my speech remains authentic, and I remain true to myself. Authenticity is a key concept for the hipster community, especially as it relates to music criticism and commercialism. When Pitchfork.com reviews albums, they receive a rating from 0 to 10 based largely on whether the individual tracks fit into a coherent album structure, whether the album fits into the band's coherent career arc, and whether the album forges an identity for itself that is independent of the corrupting emptiness of commercialism. As such, in order to elicit a 9 or higher from Pitchfork, an album must be authentically itself, must be authentically a creation of an individual or band, and must be authentically resistant to the meaninglessness of commercialism. Ironic musical expression and ironic critical observations can both serve to bolster this authenticity by negating the inauthenticity of commercialism. As I have already stated, when Wallers expresses a desire to punish non-free thinkers, he expresses a desire to resist meaninglessness. But when he sings about literally encountering an embodied satanic presence in real life, he removes himself from the meanings of his words to some degree. If to resist meaning is to negate it, then Wallers denies the negation of the loss of meaning. This is crucially different from the defining act of the depressed narcissist, which is to deny the negation of the loss of the original love object. The narcissistic depressive denial of negation results in a loss of expressive meaning, which is negated by ironic hipster expression, and this negation is denied by Wallers, which means he does not believe that negational irony can cure the sadness that is induced by meaninglessness. Or put another way, he does not believe in the worth of authenticity. What is the meaning of this comparison between Country Teasers and internet music criticism? It is possible that it is meaningless. Why should anybody care about this comparison? It is possible that there is no reason why. But even though I concede these possibilities, I am not left, in the end, with only meaninglessness. When Wallers denies negational irony, the result is not zero. Rather, we are resultantly invited to explore the possibilities that lie beyond compulsive negation and to be free to avoid or confront or laugh at loss at will.